Good evening and welcome to the 428th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture-story Symposium. This is a weekly lecture series on comics, animation, illustration, and other text image work. It's funded by the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation and the New School. Our guest tonight in that little box is Laurence Grove. Laurence Grove is a professor of French and text image studies and director of the Sterling Maxwell Center for the Study of Text Image Cultures at the University of Glasgow. His research focuses on historical aspects of text image forms, including bande dessinée. Oh, period. Laurence Grove, also known as Billy, has authored in full or jointly 14 books and approximately 60 chapters or articles. These in a variety of publications, including French Studies, the PMLA, the Modern Language Association, and Yale French Studies. Tonight, Laurence is here to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Glasgow Looking Glass. So take it away.
Oh, thank you, Ben. First of all, to check you can all hear me okay? That's coming through.
Yes.
Yeah, great. And thank you, Ben, for all your help and kindness and also the many discussions we've been having about the early history or not of comics. You're probably wondering if I'm in Glasgow, why the sun is shining, because that doesn't happen in Glasgow. The reason being is that at the moment I have a teaching scholarship at the Center for Comic Studies in San Diego. So I'm at SDSU at the moment, which is a different view on things. The paper I'm about to present to you, I very much hope for it to be a discussion. And if you do think that, hey, no, that's not quite right, please do say no, Billy, Laurence. That's absolutely nonsense. I'm not buying that, and we can discuss it. Feel free to pop in either via the chat whenever. I thought I might be saying presenting material that is little known, but Ben being Ben has made it clear that it's not that little known, and there's a whole series in Yale which I didn't really know much about. So I'll go ahead as I've planned it, but feel free to intervene. Well, the question of the world's first comic, then, which of course is a false question, but we'll look at it anyway. In 2005, we're celebrating the bicentenary of the invention of comics. June the 11th is the exact date, although I'd always assumed it was little known. What I'm going to give then today is a little bit of context to this bicentenary and ask what the debate itself tells us about comics or indeed about culture in general. And I hope this is a bit where we'll get a chat going. Um, if one were to Google, and of course that is the only scholarly way of doing things, the world's first comic, um, we would get all sorts of answers. We would get many references to Superman. We would get go from the yellow kid from New York to Töpffer, and a little bit more about Töpffer later. And then lower down, we will get nowadays the Glasgow Looking Glass, but that's not always been the case. So today, I'm going to present the Glasgow Looking Glass, the winner of this dubious title, um, and look at why perhaps it was overlooked for so long. The first thing I will do, however, is to add the title of first modern comic, because we can, of course, say that humankind has always told stories with pictures. And here are some of the examples which I'm sure you do all know about, be it the Lascaux caves from approximately 20,000 BCE, linked to the whole Lascaux theory of the invention of comics. In the middle, the Bayeux Tapestry, which is not a tapestry and it's not from Bayeux, um, but it does seem to be an image narrative. Or the one at the end is a 15th century apocalypse manuscript from Glasgow, which includes here and elsewhere not only image narrative and text mixed with image, but it's got some good speech bubbles as well. And Ben is the expert on that if you want to know more about speech bubbles. For it to be a modern comic, however, you probably need the modern technique of mass production of images, which would be lithography. Um, and that would have been invented by Alois Senfelder in Munich in 1796. And one of the best explanations of the history of lithography and the invention and what it is given by the site at the Met. When John Watson, and he was the person who produced the Glasgow Looking Glass, um, advertised it, one of the key expressions for him was John Watson lithographic press. And this comes up time and time again as clearly something being of importance. It was one of the specialities of John Watson's press in Glasgow. The key moment in the world's first comic debate was in France in 1996, when there was a discussion on les origines de la bande dessinée. And I'm not quite sure why it came about in 96. I'd be really interested to find out if there are any theories about why this should have been a key moment in the debate on the invention of comics. In this debate, the main contenders were set up as being the Yellow Kid, whom I'm sure you all know, Utko was a creation for the New York World around 1895. What this did have was mass distribution on a scale that I probably hadn't been seen before, but it was nonetheless 1895, which is considerably later on in the 19th century. But the origins debate in 1996 from Angoulême came down very strongly on the French or the French language side of things, because Töpffer was, as we know, in fact Swiss, but that didn't seem to matter in this debate. The important thing was that he spoke French, and one of the more recent collections, which is a wonderful work of erudition, is David Kunzel's translation and facsimile edition of Töpffer's works. Hopefully you've got a handout which Ben would have made available to you. And on the handout, I've put most of the references in terms of bibliographic references. So the strips of Rodolphe Töpffer started, for instance, with Monsieur Jabot. And although the date given here is 1833, in fact, it didn't come out till 1835, which is a whole story. Töpffer himself was from 1799 to 1846. He also created Mrs. Jabot doing what Jabot does. He also created Monsieur Crépin, which was from 1837, but actually drawn in 1827. So this is nearer to the date. The other one that is often cited is Obadiah Oldbuck from New York, originally 1842, and one of the gems of the San Diego Library is one of the original editions of Obadiah Oldbuck, but I suspect in New York you've got them 10 a penny. This for many years was considered to be America's first comic. Well, as you all know, this is beaten, in my opinion, by the Glasgow Looking Glass, dating from 1825. I'll see if I can get, or if you can put, just to get an idea of how many of you here know of the Glasgow Looking Glass and have known of it for some time. I know, talking to Ben, he said, "Yeah, of course we all know the Glasgow Looking
You
Glass."
can raise your hand.
Yeah, then you knew it. Yeah, okay.
You
Well,
people.
when we have, oh, I've got the chat here later. Uh, Alan's, you've got a fairly good run of them. Okay, I'd be interested in talking because apparently the prices in recent years have absolutely zoomed. We're talking about now thousands of pounds. Um, but interesting, Bernard, I haven't heard of it. Camden, yeah. So it's interesting that it's still slightly in the midst of comic history, and it still is a fact that if you look in the traditional comics encyclopedia, it won't get a mention, although some of the websites have been updated. Um, so one of the questions I'll be asking is why, what has been the reception of the Glasgow Looking Glass, and why perhaps was it overlooked for so many years? It certainly wasn't featured in the 1996 debate. Um, it appeared firstly in 1825, and this is a facsimile copy. Unfortunately, I don't I do have my own copy, but it's been framed and it's back in Scotland. And this is a facsimile that we have made. Um, but this is a facsimile of issue one, and one of the projects we had thought of, which came up in a recent conference in Brussels, was to produce a facsimile of the complete run of 16 or 17 issues of this, which went from 1825 to 1826. Um, it seems to me that that doesn't exist, a complete run of facsimiles, but today I think I'm being constantly surprised, and maybe somebody's going to say, "Oh yeah, there is an available complete run, for instance, on the Yale website." It was created by William Heath. Of whom there are very few images. For a long while, I and others thought a picture at the top of a looking glass here was William Heath, but it seems that was probably John Watson. There are very few images of William Heath, and comparatively little is known about him. We do know that he came up from London to Glasgow, and his initial reason so for doing was given as creating a panorama on Buchanan Street. That's one of the main streets going down Glasgow, a panorama of the Battle of Waterloo. Um, there are some images of that, but little is known of it, and the panorama hasn't survived, although one very similar is actually in Waterloo, and some panoramas do exist. Um, but the other suggestion put forward for Heath coming to Glasgow from London was to avoid drinking debts, which we will see as being a familiar theme in William Heath's trajectory. Why then is this the first modern comic? Well, first of all, as I'm sure you're aware, we should note the ambiguous terminology, which doesn't exist in other languages where we have terms such as bande dessinée or fumetti. Comic in English can be a comic as a journal. So this is what we would call a comic, or this might be a comic, or this might be a comic, as you know, as compared with a comic as a strip, of which we can claim the Glasgow Looking Glass had the first, this being the history of a coat, which um, appeared in 4 episodes in the early numbers of the Glasgow Looking Glass, which told the story of the central character. It's an object character, the coat, which goes from being the the wool on the sheep to being shorn, to being made into a dandy's coat, to uh, going down the social scale until at the end of the tale it's given to the pigs. These various episodes do interact text and image, and they do include the famous words "to be continued." So this would then perhaps arguably be the first comic strip within the first modern comic, which would leave us perhaps with the title of Monsieur Jabot and the other Töpffer works, which are longer, as being the first modern graphic novel. And I had this conversation with Thierry Grunstein, and he somewhat begrudgingly admitted that the Glasgow Looking Glass was the first comic, but that Töpffer was still the first graphic novel. So if we consider this to be a valid debate, that's one we can take further. But if a comic is a regularly published mixture of text and image, fact and fiction, then The Looking Glass is that. More specifically, a comic offers a recognizable satire of society. So these are examples taken from the various numbers of the Glasgow Looking Glass. Here, a satire of the banking systems in England and Scotland, which was somewhat more poignant a decade or so back when the money markets collapsed. Or in this case, of the New Year celebration in Glasgow, which in many ways hasn't changed that much. It involves a lot of drink ending up in a fight and people in prison. Sometimes the comics will show us images with which we're not comfortable. And sorry, I should have warned you about these before. This is about the actor Keane's visit to America, using here examples of what was the news of the day, but presented in a way which we no longer consider acceptable. Some of the jokes are lost. This particular one tells us about board and lodging, which is available for a few ladies and gentlemen, well-aired furnished rooms, reference as to character is required. So it looks like a normal advert for lodgings until we pick up the reference and realise that it is in fact the Duke Street prison in the East End of Glasgow. How many of the jokes in the Glasgow Looking Glass and elsewhere are entirely lost to us because we don't pick up the references? Satire of society. Here is satire of the king in Saint Cloud, acting as a hobby horse for unruly kids. How much of satire today is based on political figures? And of course, the element which we consider certain as a key part of modern comics, often the speech bubble, does appear frequently in the Glasgow Looking Glass. Camden, how was the Glasgow Looking Glass published monthly? It was every 2 weeks. Yeah. It also involves the element of reader participation. We might know of this in children's comics of the 20th century, such as Le Journal de Mickey, where, of course, we have the Club Mickey. But the such notion of the Club Mickey happened way before, in 1825, when John Watson, and this seems to be John Watson, is replying to correspondents who have sent in, presumably, various letters. We don't know exactly what it is, but he's saying he is giving them answers in this to correspondence rubric, which existed at the end of most of the numbers. So in this respect, the Glasgow Looking Glass has many of the criteria we might associate with the modern comic. So why did the Looking Glass go unnoticed for so long? You might say because it was a flop. Well, that's not the case. It wasn't a flop. And if we look at the bottom of the end of each issue, it will say where it can be obtained. And whereas in the early issues, it's just one or two sellers in Glasgow, as we get on to the later issues, we see that not only is it available in Glasgow, it's also available in Paisley, in Greenock, in Edinburgh, and down into England, Cambridge, London, Liverpool. So the expansion of this, plus the change of name to the Northern Looking Glass after certain issues, suggests that it was doing well. In the book by John Strang, which is quite an amusing read about Glasgow and its clubs, it's a little bit later, 1856, which tells us about such institutions as the Partick Duck Club or the Cheap and Nasty Club. It's in this book that we learn of the success of the Glasgow Looking Glass, often as annoying the police of the city or having the citizens in roars of laughter. And we get the impression that the Glasgow Looking Glass was available through the drinking clubs to be read and enjoyed as a throwaway piece of culture. And we do have in Glasgow University Library one such copy where you can still see the folds and above all the wine stains, which suggests would be a cheaper non-color copy, presumably left lying around in the drinking clubs for the enjoyment and merriment of those in these establishments. It seems that the Glasgow Looking Glass finished because, once again, Heath was forced to leave town, and a manuscript in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow tells us, and I've put this quote on the handout, which I hope you've got. It says that from Dawson Turner, the art critic, Heath, is a person of extraordinary talents, but unfortunately talents, especially of that kind, and prudent, cautious self-control do not always go together. Hence, poor Heath has continually been in difficulties and was on account of debt that he was obliged to quit Glasgow. So it seems like he ran away from Glasgow for the same reason that he got there, because of drinking debts. There was an attempt once he got to London at further issues of the Northern Looking Glass, the new series, but these were short-lived. I've not seen more than a couple of examples of these, so if any of you have seen further examples of the extensions of the Glasgow Looking Glass, I'd be really interested in that. In 1906, there was a reprint called The Scotch Punch of 80 years ago. But that, again, is fairly difficult to come by. And until John McShane's article in the Droof in 2007, to the best of my knowledge, virtually nothing was written about the Glasgow Looking Glass. John McShane's article, the Droof is a Scottish arts magazine. His article is not entirely academic, it's very readable, and it sets things in motion, but it certainly misses out a lot of the information. John McShane is still a working historian who has done a lot to promote, including at the National Library in Scotland, what we do know or what we don't know about William Heath. In 2016, we did have an exhibition in the Hunterian, Comic Invention, which showcased the Glasgow Looking Glass. It was called Comic Invention. It was a lot of fun, and it involved sections which were mixing the culture of comics. So we managed to put a Liechtenstein next to a Rembrandt, next to there you can just about see a David Hockney and a Palazzi, on the idea of art as telling stories. And in the setup of it, we had sections which gave a chronological timeline, which you see at the top, going, for instance, from medieval manuscripts up to 1825, and then the section on the right had this culture of comics section saying that the notion of a first comic is a false question because it's all around us. This year we have had a small exhibition in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow. This is one of the main public libraries in Glasgow and in Europe. It's a library where anybody can go in. It's a bit like the New York Public Library, but obviously not as big as that. But for Europe, it is an enormous facility. And we have put on an exhibition or a display on the Glasgow Looking Glass. It extended until August. This was what one of the display cases look like. So you can see that it is fairly limited in its scope, but it seemed to get a fairly good reception. There was also a very small display in special collections in Glasgow University Library. So all of these are limited, although there are more of them and there have been some of them. There was also released in tandem with the Mitchell exhibition, the new Glasgow Looking Glass, which got contemporary authors together to do the same thing. Oh no, not that. See, it looks so similar. Which will have satire about life, about politics, then and now. It's and one of the considerations of a modern equivalent of the Looking Glass. This seems to have sold quite well, but it's still almost an underground fanzine, despite its similarity to the historical work. So my question is, why did it go so long before the Glasgow Looking Glass was discovered? I would say, and I'm only guessing here, that for many years it was considered just to be frivolous local history. Many of the copies in Glasgow University Library are in collections of local history. And when in 1996, and again, I'm not sure why this date, if you've got any ideas for that, it would be great. But in 1996, people did start looking for the world's first comic. It was pre-internet, so people looked in Geneva, New York, and Paris, but wouldn't have thought of looking in a sleepy medieval Scottish university town, even if Glasgow wasn't entirely sleepy. But that is perhaps not quite the end of the story. And this is something I'd like to take forward in that the Glasgow Looking Glass could perhaps be far more important in terms of a history of satire than we imagine. It seems to me that the cartoonists of the first new Looking Glass, the one in London, people such as John Tenniel, could have picked up on themes of the Glasgow Looking Glass when, and this is one such theme of the Glasgow Looking Glass, when creating in London in 1841 a publication we all know, Punch, also boasting the work of John Tenniel. I'm pretty sure there was also a Glasgow Punch of 1832, but there is a direct link between the Glasgow Looking Glass and the London Punch, but I haven't been able to prove it. It's something which I would have to do more sitting around in libraries to get to. There is another connection which struck me recently, is perhaps the John Tenniel could have drawn on the Glasgow publication for its title and style, and maybe influenced the author of another satirical work we all know, Through the Looking Glass, and what Alice found there. I managed to find out that Lewis Carroll would have been in Scotland around the 1824-25s. The illustrations, when we see Alice going through the looking glass, are very similar. Again, Um, as you can see, I'm touching at straws here, but I'd be interested in taking this link a bit further of the theme of the Looking Glass, and if there is a link between Lewis Carroll and the Glasgow Looking Glass. Um, to conclude then, what does the world's first comic debate tell us about comics, indeed about comics about culture in general? The debate tells us of the need to provide an empirical inventor of comics, be it Töpffer, be it William Heath, often a white male in the way that inventors had to be at the time and in past time. The debate on the invention of comics tells us about the vagaries of taste, and indeed, in the early issues of the Glasgow Looking Glass, the question of taste does come up. Is that not also true of comics in general? A form which for years was seen as a childish amusement, and which now, as we see, is perhaps a staple of the academic canon. Just to finish off, and I've aimed this at 40 minutes, hoping for questions afterwards. I would say such inevitable subjectivity depends on the following elements. Subjectivity depends on formats. Some formats are in favor, others go out of favor. At the moment, the format that's in favor is all to do with this and the pictures we can get on there. For text image formats, the favor is often linked to technology. And once again, we're going back to the lithographic press and the importance that that was. It is technology that creates the fashions. The second subjective element, I would say, is reception and readership. One person or one community's taste is another's bad taste. These change with time. One of the things I'm working on at the moment is the notion of personal journey scholarship, the notion that all academic scholarship, in fact, depends at some level on the personal tastes of the academic in question, that all academic work is autobiography, that somewhere the books we choose for our students to read. The reason in there, not necessarily any underhand reason, but it is based on our own personal biases and on what we know and what we've grown up with. It's just that this perhaps hasn't been accepted, praised, shouted about for many years. Well, it never has. It's always been considered that we should try to be empirical when we cannot be empirical. The next subjective element, I would say, is geography. We all judge by what we know, and we all have our own national uh, uh, pushes to give. I've got a tartan's jacket on today. We all see things from our own angle, and to some extent, the world's first comic debate has been part of that. Scholars from the US said it was Yellow Kid, then Töpffer was the French language world, and now, as somebody working in Scotland, I'm putting forward the Glasgow Looking Glass. Is this just personal bias? And the final one is luck. How a talk goes can just be luck. How culture goes can be luck. It can just be part of a moment. All of these elements continue with us. Indeed, they are to be continued. So, in that hope, I'm very much hoping we will get a discussion, and even that you might tell me, no, Billy, you've got it all wrong. This was the real first comic, and it doesn't matter anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurence. Um, I don't know. So you can put your name up in the chat if you want to ask a question, or type it in the chat if you'd rather have it read. Um, so there's not much writing about the editorial activity behind this. Like there's, books and many books about Punch, but there was nothing about what the editorial input was that the artist
No,
had.
no, we
And,
don't seem to know anything. I mean, it might be because he spent so much of his time running away that it hasn't been properly documented. And it was a piece of popular culture that we know was used and enjoyed in the drinking clubs of Glasgow. Well, we can understand why that has been escaped what we might call traditional history.
uh,
Um,
and any sense of the print run? Did they ever is that ever mentioned or some?
I'm guessing around 500, but
Yeah.
again, that's guessing from perhaps the number of what would have been a normal print run through the few archives that are available from John Watson's. John Watson's printers still exist. It went through to being a major company for producing the boxes for whiskey bottles. And there is a John Watson, a descendant of the John Watson, who's a very affable chap, um, but the archives are minimal. So I'm saying 500 based on what would be a normal run and on the copies that are left.
Right.
From Michael here, have I been in touch with a Lewis Carroll? Um, that would no, I haven't, and I really should. I This is just an idea which has hit me. It just seems one of these coincidences, the use of looking glass, but maybe it's such a common phrase that it is just a coincidence. But it would be, and I have consulted the letters of Lewis Carroll. There's a published edition of his correspondence, and he was in Scotland at this time. So it's not out of question that he would have seen the looking glass. But these are just guesses, hopeful guesses. But I should get in contact with the Lewis Carroll Society. Yeah.
Seems to me, Laurence, thank you very much. Great talk. Really, really enjoyed it, and I really enjoy any hat of any national stripe that gets thrown into this. It's kind of fun. It's like a playground or something like that, where people go, "I was first. Oh, I was first.
Yeah.
That sort of feel." But I do. It strikes me that it would be a beautiful comic book or a piece of fiction about research by fiction, I guess, about Carroll and that looking glass idea. Him being in Glasgow, picking up, be a wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to find out that he actually found that title and went, "Whoa, this is the one I'm going to use." But it'd also be a really fun piece of fiction as well, I think. Yeah.
Maybe that's the way forward. That way, if I can't actually find the facts out in the library, it doesn't matter too much. Yeah.
Not too much. I think you got plenty of facts. But also, thank you very much for acknowledging autobiography and luck as factors in scholarship. I think that's wonderful and a very generous vision of the way one
I,
muddles through or stumbles through archives.
I
Yeah.
just think as things go on, and I'm lucky enough not to have become cynical, um, but I still enjoy research, but I realize increasingly so much of it is just by luck.
Yeah.
It's luck in the way it's received, it's luck in the people you meet when you're talking about it, and it's also luck in what you happen to know as you grow up. And I mean, there's a negative side to that in that we all have our own biases, which in my case are white European biases. Um, but at least increasingly, I'm accepting those. Um, yeah. But so thank you for saying yeah. Um, that these are elements.
Um,
Um,
I'm
uh,
down here in Australia, and just recently there's a peninsula down here which just got UNESCO listing as a World Heritage Site of petroglyphs by Aboriginal people from tens of thousands of years ago. And one of the claims that people use about is that there's the first representation of a human face on this peninsula.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, and it's kind of a, as you say, or intimate, I guess. You know, this sort of first obsession. You know, it's kind of like a tag line in news reports or something
Yeah.
to hang.
It's the effect of journalism upon us. I mean, if ever any of us here have been contacted by a journalist, they don't like us to say, well, I really don't know and I can't quite give you the precise date. They need you to say, this was the first and this was the date of it and this is why it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple here from Camden, the background of the artists in the issues. Um, as far as we know, most of it was drawn by Heath himself. He also had the pseudonym of Paul Pry, um, and a lot are signed by his initials, but other than that, no, we don't know it. And Karen, comic done by students making fat. Oh, that was great. It was 1754. So this is in Karen. This is in Columbia, is it?
Yes, it's in our university archive.
Okay.
I could if I can share something.
Yeah, let you share that. Hold on.
Okay.
I don't know if that'll
because it really is extraordinary. It's got
you out. Wait.
Seduction, date rape, pregnancy, and abortion.
Wow. And it was a one-off, was it? Or
yes.
Okay, you should be able to share that.
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, wow.
Very cool.
It's also overflowing with anti-Irish sentiment.
Oh.
Do you mind if I take a screenshot of this?
Please feel free. I can actually also email you a much better quality image of it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yeah.
And I've just always been wondering did where did they learn to do that?
They're common in the 18th century, right? I mean, Hogarth uses that, those long speech balloons that you already see in medieval images, actually,
Right.
that the French like to call phylactères, right? So I think
yeah, I've seen them called banderoles.
Yeah.
And I use that as an example of actually, have you ever seen the Stephen Harding Bible Goliath page?
Right, yes.
Oh my God, I've never seen anything that's more obviously comics, and it was done in 1109.
Right. So there's that wonderful website, La BD avant la BD, right? That you probably know, that was so they have these earliest. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the question is, I mean, I think it's interesting. So a lot of the images that you showed made me think sometimes of Hogarth, right? It made me think of the satires and I put links about you had the one image of the Scotland, England, and the distinct reaction to the market or something, and that immediately reminded me of the late 18th century, satires that showed the French emaciated and hungry, and the English nice and fat and eating beef and all of that, all the contrasts. So there is,
Gilray
it
and
becomes how one defines things, right?
Yeah. Do you know of Mary Toft? It
No.
was a scandal in the mid 18th century, I think, or early 18th century, with drawings by Hogarth using speech bubbles. It was basically a woman who was picked out to do a farce, a joke against the surgeons of the time and the king, because she was portrayed as having given birth to rabbits. And so it was obviously a hoax. She didn't give birth to the rabbits, but
No.
the surgeon of the king said that she did, and the king believed his surgeon, and were made a laughing stock of. And Hogarth then did a comic version of the story of Mary Toft. It's a really interesting fait divers in terms of gender studies and also in terms of a history of comics.
I need to look that up. Thank you.
So, a really interesting case. And in terms of fake news, it's an interesting one. Many echoes with some of the things that happen nowadays.
Yeah. So it's I was also wondering if why the looking glass, right? Why that term at that moment in history? Why does
Yeah.
that take over, right? So 100 years earlier, you've got the Spectator. You also have magic lanterns, and there was actually in this lecture series a really good talk by I forget her name, Melissa, maybe Ferrari, on the magic lanterns, and she showed
Yeah.
a version of the magic lantern of Alice in Wonderland, actually, that with slides that were used. So I'm wondering why that term seems to somehow speak to people at that particular juncture.
I think it's to do with seeing yourself as others see you, which is often a distorting mirror. The actual the motto that goes with it, and this is in the first issue, is "Palmam qui meruit ferit." So you carry the palms you deserve. But in the later ones, there is reference to the idea of seeing yourself, which
Well,
is
like Adam Smith's Spectator, so it would make sense in Glasgow too,
yeah,
right? The man within the breast that's looking, yeah.
yeah.
Lots of wonderful echoes and threads that can.
Can you give an example of any of the Scottish dialect humor?
Yes, there is. Now, let's see if I can get it in here. Uh, no, not in this one, but in other ones there are in search of a situation. A situation can be a job, but it can also be in some of the Scottish dialects a, a troublesome situation. Is that Scottish or is that just general? There was domestic intelligence is a phrase which apparently was used in Scottish newspapers. Was it just Scottish? Again, I'm not, but anyway, in Scottish newspapers, it means local news, domestic intelligence. And then there are a lot of mocking cartoons showing people who clearly are not that intelligent under the rubric of domestic intelligence. But I suspect that there is a lot of local dialect in here which I just haven't picked up. Not only because I didn't grow up in Scotland, but also because I didn't grow up in the 1820s.
Any other questions?
Also interesting in terms of the every nationality kind of claims, making claims. I'm actually often struck when I read early French, and I don't mean Francophone, I mean French, uh, analysis of comics, how Americanocentric they are. That is the focus. Eventually, Töpffer becomes this major precursor, but there is a tendency to default to the United States for several decades of French scholarship, which as a Belgian, of course, I do not agree with. Because we are far more happy to accept bande dessinée as our own.
I think that's because a lot of the comic scholarship in France came with the Club des Bandes Dessinées, which went on
Right.
to be scholarly institutions, but often based on fan-based setups. And the
Right.
fan-based, nostalgia-based readers who would have remembered things like the Journal de Mickey, which
Right.
would use a lot of American imports. And although
Right.
Le Journal de Mickey was a French publication created by Vinclair in France for French kids, it drew upon syndicated strips from Disney and
Yeah.
others, which may be why when it was in the 1960s and France was really starting to treat comics seriously, the comics they were looking to were the ones which would have been the imports of their youth.
Right.
John Crespi asks, can the figures in these 18th century cartoons, I guess you're talking about the example that Karen showed, can they hear each other speaking in the panels? In other words, is there a conversation going on, a response?
Yes.
There is,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
There's the answer. I mean, and I just put the
It's
link
nice when it's a straightforward answer.
I mean, I put the link to the Yale online version of that collected, the 1825 bound edition. So
Oh, thank you.
you can read it.
That's interesting. I just read a book that was saying that hearing each other, like transdiegetic speech balloons, was an early 20th century thing, very late 19th century thing. That it wasn't, that it was kind of unthinkable before that, but well,
Why is
I
that?
guess
Well,
not.
the theory of recorded
Maybe.
sound, but there are too
If I
many
get
examples of people arguing and hearing each other. So I don't know if you can show us an example, but
yeah, I think they're talking to each other. Dan, you're an infamous rogue.
yeah, I
Interesting.
know there are lots of occasions in Gilray where people
Yeah.
refer to the speech within their speech balloons. They say, how could you say that?
Yeah.
I'm self-referential and other early prints where there's a text narration below the drawing that refers to a speech balloon within the drawing that says, and someone was calling out the dead, and there you see the figure doing that. So, I mean, to people who study the theater of the book and toy theater and early Renaissance and even medieval, it's all performative, it's all sound-based. So I think people might be looking back at this stuff with the idea of silent reading or something. I don't quite know, but yeah, there's a lot, there's just tons of scholarly writing about why these things had to be speech events. But I don't know. It's usually most interesting where there's a reference from the text that says somebody had to utter these words, like the Annunciation, things like that. So, and Alan says most commonly they don't respond. Uh, well, we have to do a.
Yes, sure.
I think the medieval ones are often just citing quotations from the Bible, so maybe it's not.
Well, sometimes the Annunciation is a verbal event.
Yeah.
And that's recorded, and then there was a response by the Virgin Mary. So these things are played out in some paintings with text banderoles and things. So, but anyway, I mean, the not the pre-print history of text image storytelling, picture recitation, and theater and puppetry, and I mean, that's what the print tradition, the print culture was sort of building on. So people looking at theater. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so to say that somehow they were all mute or deaf, people were deaf before a certain time in history, this would be a strange argument, but
Ben,
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. This is everyone involved. There does seem to be a difference though between representations, and I used to refer to this representations where it's a sort of a performance of speech, where we see the person almost like as what as an act of oratory that we're watching or looking at in the drawing, so that the speech is represented as heard, but is not we're not seeing a form of actual interaction, so that the response, and even where there are responses, the responses themselves can be performed responses. So you might have two speakers representing the same space, and they're speaking in a way that's coordinated, but they're still, it's almost if they're reciting, one speaker recites what their part of the speech, the next speaker recites their part of the speech, but that there's not actual interaction, so that there would be a qualitative difference if the representation was of two characters, two figures who are actually speaking back and forth between each other.
Well,
Um,
so how do you read a Shakespearean play script? The same, you think it's not happening there either? I mean, it's a piece of theater, imagined theater, like it's imagined three-dimensional world. It's not happening really. It's all imagined. So I don't know.
so then the examples that you're referring or that you have in mind would be cases where it's a performance with a performance of a sort of an interaction that's not I get um that's not presented for an audience. In other words, with I mean, one of the so with something like sort of like much historical theater, there is that the we're watching a scene, but the scene itself is the degree to which it's the scene, it would be the equivalent of a non-theatrical interaction versus an interaction that's still being performed. It's yeah.
You see the
I'm
difference.
just
I
I'm
don't
so
see
I
the
think
difference. But
yeah I think
toy theater, when kids put on these classic British plays, they were adults or children did it. They were performing them, out loud in their room. There's no record of it, but there's a play script that comes with it. So I think the whole print tradition of text image stuff is just a way to. It was, the videotape of their time. They couldn't record the event, the audio visual event. They could record it as text and drawings, sometimes very compressed. I don't know, sometimes in other ways, other layouts. But I don't know. I don't quite get the
I think in my question, I'm thinking particular the Billy and Dan, not Billy, the example that Billy showed us of the Billy and Dan example where they're where you just see two we have two figures speaking each other's presence, but there is a sense that they're yes, thank you. Even though facing each other, it's sort of there is an odd sense there's a sense that they're not, that this is
if
not
you
an
quarrel again before me, I'll be damned. I mean, the devil is saying they're having a quarrel. So I don't think it could be clearer that that's what's going on. If you quarrel again before me, I'll be damned, but I'll take you below. Is that what it says? Yeah. I mean, there are lots of cases like that where there's literally this speech refers to an argument or a conversation or and the other thing is, there's a long tradition of people writing about early text image work from the first half of the 19th century and saying, and in this cartoon, so and so said something. I mean, or exclaimed, or they didn't say it was different than any other texturally recorded conversation. You know, all these books. There are some in cross-cultural ones. I know there are lots of German early readings of text image work, but we want to imagine how people read these, saw these things. The contemporary reader saw them. Um, so,
And Billy, is that sort of an interest that you have in an interest in the way that these were read? Is that sort of one of the things that you're thinking about?
Yeah, and it's exactly it. Although I'm increasingly coming to the conclusion that we can't really know, or at least we can't be sure, we can only guess. And the guesses will be based inevitably on what we do now. Um, and the question comes up is, are we missing something obvious? That,
yeah.
because
Well,
because
this, right. Sorry, go ahead.
no, but it's because we have to judge by what we know. I mean, in so many domains, and that then means, well, sometimes we miss something that's entirely obvious, but it's just not within our thought waves. And I do often think about exactly how people would interact or read these volumes. Um, there's a big research project on emblem books and on taking the analysis of people's eyes and where do they go, what do they look at first? Is it the picture, the text? But obviously, we can only do that with 21st century guinea pigs. Is a 21st century guinea pig, i.e., human guinea pig, the same as a 16th or 17th century reader? Um, is there something fundamental in the world around us that would have? I, I mean, I can only guess that the 21st century guinea pig would be distracted by a text on their phone, whereas the 16th century reader would not be. But to actually be sure of any of this, apart from by hypotheses, is very difficult. That's not really a very incisive answer for you, Jonathan, is it? But the quick answer is yes. I think about this a lot, and I'm afraid I haven't got very far.
Okay, no, oh, thank you. No, yeah, no, it's fascinating. It just comes up, particularly like as you're suggesting, the dangers always of and the question is always to the degree to which we project our current reading habits and expectations onto the historical audience.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot interesting, right? I was just reading a book, I think it's called The Sound of the City, that's going back to ancient, some medieval and later manuscripts that have musical notation and then references to how people read that. And there were also ballad sheets that have musical notation in them, and they were performed in the street. That we know from Mayhew. People sang them in the street. So I don't think the performative aspect of this can be in question. Uh, there's a book, Reading in the Wilderness, that 13th century manuscript uh, made by these monks in London. That's all about performative reading in private, but reading out loud. So, I mean, so anyway, there's a gigantic literature about that. And it's sort of not deeply connected with comic studies, but it's
In
some,
Augustine's Confessions, tells about people being astonished that he read without moving his lips.
yeah, yeah,
He was silently. Most people were reading out loud when they read, and that's 5th century.
yeah. I forget exactly when silent reading came into practice, but anyway, these the tradition of the ballad sheet, with illustration, and some of those even have speech banderoles of some kind that are that were made to be performed. And the only records we have of people like Mayhew watching people perform them in the street and writing about them, what that was like. And so I don't know. Um,
Are there any archives of still in existence of the publisher of the Looking Glass, the Glasgow
Uh,
Looking Glass?
John Watson, yeah, the company is still going,
hmm,
and there is a John Watson of the descendant still there, but
Right.
the archives are poorly kept. Um, so
Because
the
it might, yeah, sorry.
just the easy answer is no, in that although the company is still going, they don't really have any archives from the period of the 1820s. Um, and John Watson, the current John Watson, is very interested in all of this. And when he came along to the opening in the Mitchell Library, so it's not that they don't care; it's just that they haven't got them.
Right.
Uh,
Is there any kind of letters for the from the readers section in the various issues?
what we do have is they're one way letters in that it's, for instance, it's like this one where what we've got is John Watson
Oh,
replying.
right.
So he'll say often, "Dear J." He doesn't give the full names; he just gives initials. Um, that is a good idea. We will try that for next week. Or, um, there's some difficulty in making use of a lookers on that we shall try. So presumably, a looker on has written in with a suggestion, and here John Watson is saying, we won't be able to do that practically, but thank you for sending it. Problem is, we don't know what a looker on has said.
Yeah,
Um,
and also we don't necessarily know if there was a letter. I'm thinking uh, of the history of the publication of La Princesse de Clèves. There was an initial, um, it was a version of La Princesse de Clèves was a story very much like it. It was first published in Le Mercure Galant. And then they claimed to have they asked for letters and responses from readers, and then they actually included those letters, but there's a lot of, I mean, most people seem to believe that those letters were made up by, I forget his name now, the editor of the Mercure Galant, so that the letters uh, are not reliable as sources, as published, because they may not have existed at all.
I mean, I get the feeling from this that people had been contacting Watson, and he's trying to give answers to them. But again, I'm lost in time. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the other famous example is Candide, Voltaire, which has the false preface where it says this was found in so and so's papers or whatever. And
Defoe, yeah. Crusoe, yeah. Yeah.
in that Keen in America cartoon you showed us, there's
yeah,
some real dialect. I mean, Shakespearean text
yeah.
recited by Keene, and then the people leaving the theater saying, he very bad man, sort of,
Apparently, he did a tour in Carolina.
right.
Um, he was a known Shakespearean actor who also had a colourful personal life, apparently,
Not sure
which,
that there are plays about it, yeah.
yeah,
But I mean, there's dialect there in that cartoon. I don't see. I'm probably thinking of that whole series that Brian Maidment wrote about the Dustman, this Cockney sort of character that's very hot, very full of Cockney dialect or some working class dialect of England. That's maybe I'm thinking of that. I don't think but anyway, wait. Putman, yeah, that's sort of a Scottish expression. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
On page,
Yeah.
I don't know what page this is. There's a cartoon where somebody responds, so they're going to pull down Carlton House. What can that be for? And the response is Hutman. They're wandering statues for the new. They're something statues. Oh, they're wanting statues for the new house and haven't the silver to send to Scotland for. So there's some attempt at dialect, Scottish dialect.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a response to the question he asks him. I'll show you that. It's in the Yale, where is that here? It's in the Yale digital thing, that cartoon.
Okay.
So they'd be going to pull down this one, the pigs. And I don't know. I think maybe I'm thinking of other dialect jokes. I mean, I haven't, but I remember seeing at least that kind of Scottish dialect stuff going on. So anyway, stop sharing. So any other questions in the chat? No. Okay. So yeah. But I think you touched on why it was overlooked. It was Glasgow and it was a short run. It didn't run for 50 years. So things get lost like that. I don't know how many more journals were lost, but
yeah. I mean, in lithography was invented at the end of the 18th century. Are there other world's first comics hanging around somewhere in smaller towns? 1825 doesn't give much of a window, which is why I suspect this is the first one. But maybe I don't know.
Comic magazine, right?
Yeah.
Right. But questions. Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
See you later. See you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Take
Enjoy
care.
San Diego. I was just there.
Oh, thank you.
Next time. All right. Thanks, Ben. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.